Welcome to Monk's Temple. Find your stillness now. Allow your body to settle exactly where it is, whether that's in a comfortable chair, lying in your bed, or sitting on a cushion on the floor. There's no need to adjust or move unless you feel called to. This is your time, your space, your journey inward. Take a slow, deep breath. Feel the air enter your body, cool and fresh. Feel it leave, warm and releasing. With each exhale, imagine you're letting go of just a little bit of the weight you've been carrying today. The tension in your shoulders, the tightness in your jaw, the busyness in your mind. Just let it begin to soften now. In our modern world, we're taught to accumulate. We accumulate possessions, achievements, relationships, titles, degrees, and experiences. We measure our worth by the size of our accumulation. And yet, despite all this gathering, there's a persistent emptiness that many of us feel. A quiet whisper in the background that asks, is this all there is? We reach for our phones the moment we have an empty moment. We fill silence with noise, stillness with motion, and solitude with company. Because being alone with ourselves, truly alone, can feel uncomfortable. It can feel like sitting with a stranger. The Buddha, the awakened one, looked deeply into this human condition over 2,500 years ago. What he discovered wasn't a doctrine to be believed, but a truth to be seen. He observed that the mind is constantly reaching, grasping, wanting. Even when it gets what it wants, the satisfaction is temporary. Soon enough, the mind finds something new to want. It's like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. The Buddha called this condition dukkha, a word that means suffering, dissatisfaction, a deep-seated unease that permeates our existence. But here's the radical insight. The Buddha didn't teach that suffering is a punishment or a mistake. He taught that suffering has a cause, and because it has a cause, it can be understood and brought to an end. This isn't about escaping life. It's about fully inhabiting it without being consumed by it. It's about learning to surf the waves rather than being pulled under by them. Let me share a story that illuminates this truth in a way that concepts alone cannot. There was once a young woman named Maya who lived in a bustling city. From the outside, her life looked enviable. She had a corner office with a view, a stylish apartment, and a calendar filled with social engagements. But inside, Maya felt like she was drowning. Every morning, before her feet touched the floor, her mind would already be racing through the day's demands. The emails she hadn't answered, the presentation she needed to perfect, the phone call she'd been avoiding. She'd lie in bed at night, exhausted but unable to sleep, replaying conversations and worrying about tomorrow. One weekend, Maya traveled to visit her grandmother who lived in a small cottage near the ocean. Her grandmother was a woman of few words but deep presence. When Maya arrived, she found her grandmother sitting on the porch, simply watching the waves. No phone, no book, no activity. Just sitting. Maya joined her, and for the first few minutes, the silence felt unbearable. She wanted to check her phone, to make conversation, to do something. Finally, Maya blurted out, "Grandma, how do you just sit here? Don't you get bored? Don't you feel like you should be doing something?" Her grandmother smiled gently and pointed to the ocean. "Do you see those waves?" Maya nodded. "They keep coming," her grandmother said. "One after another, without stopping. Some are big, some are small. Sometimes they crash hard, sometimes they lap gently. But the ocean doesn't try to stop them. It doesn't try to make them different. It just holds them all. Your thoughts are like those waves. They keep coming, and that's natural. The problem isn't the waves. The problem is you're trying to hold back the tide. Maya sat with this, watching the waves roll in and out. For the first time in years, she felt a small space open inside her. Not a solution to her problems, but something more valuable. A different way of being with them. This is the first teaching of the Buddha that we'll explore together. The recognition that peace isn't found by changing the waves, but by changing our relationship to them. The waves will keep coming. That's the nature of the ocean. Thoughts will keep coming. That's the nature of the mind. But you don't have to be pulled under by every wave. In psychological terms, we might call this metacognition, the ability to observe your own thoughts rather than being completely identified with them. The Buddha called it mindfulness. It's the difference between being lost in a movie and knowing you're sitting in a theater watching a movie. The images still move you. The story still affects you. But there's a part of you that knows it's not ultimately real. When you begin to practice this gentle observation, something remarkable happens. You start to see that your thoughts aren't facts. They're just mental events. They arise, they linger for a while, and then they pass away, like clouds moving across the sky. The sky doesn't try to hold on to the clouds or push them away. It simply provides space for them to come and go. You are the sky, not the clouds. Thank you for your confirmation. Let's continue with part 2 of our journey together at Monk's Temple. Now that we've begun to understand ourselves as the sky rather than the clouds, as the ocean rather than the individual waves, we encounter a natural question. If I'm not my thoughts, then who am I? This question has haunted philosophers and mystics for millennia. But the Buddha approached it not as a philosophical puzzle to solve, but as a direct experience to investigate. Let me share another story that illuminates this investigation. In a small village in ancient India, there lived a potter named Dhamika. He was skilled at his craft, shaping clay into beautiful vessels that people used for water, for grain, for cooking. One day, a traveling monk came through the village and stayed overnight at Dhamika's home. The potter, curious about the monk's life of simplicity, asked him, "Venerable sir, you own nothing. You travel from place to place with only your robes and your bowl. What do you have that gives you such peace?" The monk smiled and picked up one of Dhamika's clay pots. He held it up and asked, "What is this?" "It's a pot," Dhamika said. The monk nodded. "And what makes it a pot?" Dhamika was confused by the question. "The clay. The shape. The hollow inside that holds things." The monk turned the pot in his hands. "If I break it into pieces, is it still a pot?" "No," Dhamika admitted. "Then it's just pieces of clay." "So the pot isn't really the clay," the monk continued. "And it isn't really the shape, because the shape can change. And it isn't really the hollow inside, because without the clay and the shape, there is no hollow. So what is the pot?" Dhamika sat silently, his mind turning over the monk's words. The monk set the pot down gently. The pot is a convenient label we use for a temporary arrangement of clay and space. But if you look for the essential potness, the thing that makes it a pot beyond its parts, you won't find it. It's a concept. A useful one, but still just a concept. He looked directly at Demika. In the same way, we use the label self or me or I for a temporary arrangement of body, feelings, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness. But if you look closely, if you investigate directly, you won't find a permanent, solid self anywhere. There's just the ongoing process of experiencing, moment after moment after moment. This teaching of the Buddha is often misunderstood. People hear that the Buddha said there is no self, and they think he was being nihilistic, that he was saying we don't exist. But that's not accurate. The Buddha wasn't saying we don't exist. He was saying we don't exist in the way we think we do. We don't exist as fixed, permanent, separate entities. We exist as process. We exist as flow. We exist as the ever-changing expression of causes and conditions. Think about your own body for a moment. The cells that make up your body today are almost entirely different from the cells that made up your body 7 years ago. You're literally not the same physical being you were a decade ago. Your opinions have changed. Your preferences have changed. Your relationships have changed. What is it that continues? What is the thread that connects the child you were to the person you are now? Conventionally, we call that thread the self. And that's fine, as long as we don't mistake the thread for something solid and unchanging. The problem arises when we cling to this self as if it were a permanent possession that must be protected and defended at all costs. This clinging is the source of most of our suffering. When someone criticizes you, they're not just criticizing a collection of thoughts and feelings. They're attacking yourself. When something doesn't go your way, it's not just a disappointing outcome. It's a blow to yourself. When you fail at something, it's not just a learning experience. It's a wound to yourself. We spend enormous amounts of energy defending, promoting, and protecting this self that, upon closer inspection, turns out to be more of a verb than a noun. The freedom the Buddha pointed to comes from relaxing this tight grip on the self. Not from destroying the self, but from seeing through the illusion of its solidity. When you no longer feel there's a permanent self to defend, criticism becomes information. Failure becomes feedback. Loss becomes part of the natural flow of change. You're still here, fully present, fully alive, but without the constant background hum of anxiety about how everything affects you. Let me offer you a modern example. Imagine you're walking through a forest and you see a sign that says, "Beware of bears." Your reaction will depend entirely on your relationship to yourself. If you believe there's a solid, vulnerable self that could be harmed, you'll feel fear. You'll walk quickly, your heart racing, your senses hyper-alert. If you actually encounter a bear, that fear might save your life. But if you spend the entire hike in a state of fear, jumping at every shadow, you'll miss the beauty of the forest entirely. You'll be so focused on protecting yourself that you won't experience your life. Now imagine walking through that same forest with a different relationship to yourself. You know the sign is there. You take reasonable precautions. But you're not constantly braced against danger. You notice the sunlight filtering through the leaves. You hear the birds singing. You feel the cool breeze on your skin. If a bear appears, you'll respond appropriately. But you're not living in anticipation of the bear. You're living in the forest. This is the difference between being governed by the survival instincts of the self and living from a deeper, more expansive awareness. The self is real, but it's not ultimately real. It's useful, like the clay pot, but it's not the whole story. You are the pot, yes. But you're also the clay, and the space the clay holds, and the hands that shaped it, and the earth it came from, and the fire that hardened it. You are all of it, simultaneously. When we begin to see ourselves as process rather than product, as flow rather than fixed identity, we naturally become more curious about how this process actually works. The Buddha was remarkably precise in his analysis of the mind. He didn't just offer poetic metaphors, though he did that beautifully. He also offered a clear, systematic map of human experience that we can verify for ourselves through direct observation. One of his most helpful maps is what he called the 5 aggregates, or the 5 heaps. These are the 5 categories of experience that, when combined, create the sense of a solid self. Think of them as the 5 instruments in an orchestra. When they play together, they create a symphony that feels unified and coherent. But if you listen closely, you can hear each instrument individually. The first aggregate is form, or the physical body. This includes your body and all the material sensations that come through your senses. The warmth of the sun on your skin, the ache in your lower back, the taste of chocolate on your tongue, the sound of rain against the window. All of these are form. They're the raw data of experience. The second aggregate is feeling. Now, this is a subtle point. Feeling here doesn't mean emotion. It means the pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral tone that accompanies every experience. Every single moment of consciousness has one of these 3 tones. Right now, as you listen to my voice, there's a feeling tone. It might be pleasant, if you're finding this interesting or soothing. It might be unpleasant, if you're tired or uncomfortable. It might be neutral, if you're just hearing words without much reaction. This feeling tone is happening constantly, whether you notice it or not. The third aggregate is perception. This is the faculty of recognition. It's the part of the mind that labels experience. When you see a shape, perception says, tree. When you hear a sound, perception says, traffic. When you feel a sensation, perception says, hunger. Perception takes the raw data of form and the feeling tone and organizes it into recognizable categories. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. This is a big category. It includes all your thoughts, your intentions, your habits, your emotions, your desires, your fears. It's the stories you tell yourself, the plans you make, the memories you replay, the worries that keep you up at night. Mental formations are what we usually think of as our mind. The fifth aggregate is consciousness itself. This is the raw awareness that experiences all of the above. It's the knowing quality of mind. Consciousness doesn't do anything. It doesn't think, it doesn't feel, it doesn't perceive. It simply knows. It's like a mirror that reflects whatever appears before it without judgment or reaction. Now here's the crucial insight. We take these 5 aggregates, which are constantly arising and passing away, moment after moment, and we bundle them together into a story called me. My body, my feelings, my perceptions, my thoughts, my consciousness. And then we cling to this story as if it were the most important thing in the universe. Let me share a story that illustrates how this works in everyday life. A woman named Anika was known throughout her community for her kindness. She volunteered at the local shelter, brought meals to sick neighbors, and always had a warm smile for everyone she met. People would say, "Anika is such a good person." And Anika herself believed this. Being good was central to her identity. It was part of herself. One day, a new family moved into the neighborhood. They had a dog that barked constantly, disrupting the peace of the entire street. Anika tried everything. She brought them a welcome basket. She offered to help them settle in. She even bought their dog a toy. Nothing worked. The barking continued, and Anika's irritation grew. Finally, one evening when the barking was particularly loud and she was particularly tired, Anika snapped. She marched next door and yelled at the family. She said things she immediately regretted. She went home and slammed her door. That night, Anika couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the barking that kept her awake. It was the story she was telling herself about what had happened. I'm not the kind of person who yells at people. I'm a good person. Good people don't lose their temper. What will the neighbors think? They'll think I'm mean. They won't remember all the good things I've done. They'll only remember this. I've ruined everything. Do you see what happened here? Anika wasn't just dealing with a moment of anger. She was dealing with a threat to her identity. The mental formations of shame and self-judgment arose because the story of who she thought she was had been challenged. She was suffering not primarily from the event itself, but from the collision between the event and her fixed idea of herself. The Buddha's teaching on the aggregates offers us a way out of this kind of suffering. When we learn to see experience in terms of these 5 heaps, we start to notice that what we call self is really just a process. There was the form of the barking. There was the unpleasant feeling tone. There was the perception of rudeness. There were the mental formations of anger and then shame. There was consciousness knowing it all. But where in any of this is the solid, permanent Anika that needs to be defended? When Anika could have seen her anger as just anger, a mental formation arising due to conditions, passing away due to conditions, she wouldn't have needed to add the second layer of shame. The anger would have arisen, done its natural thing, and passed away. But because she identified with it, because she made it mean something about who she was, she kept it alive through rumination and self-judgment. This is the practical value of the Buddha's psychological map. It helps us deconstruct our experience so we can relate to it more wisely. When you feel a strong emotion, you can pause and ask yourself, which aggregate is this? Is it a physical sensation in the body? Is it a feeling tone? Is it a perception? Is it a thought? Is it just awareness itself? When you break the experience down like this, it becomes much harder to get completely lost in it. The emotion loses some of its solidity. You see it as a passing weather pattern in the sky of awareness, not as the sky itself. Now that we have this map of experience, we can begin to explore the engine that drives so much of our suffering. The Buddha identified this engine with remarkable precision. He called it craving. And he distinguished between 3 basic forms of craving that keep us trapped in cycles of dissatisfaction. The first is craving for sensual pleasures. This is the most obvious form. We want pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touches. We want the pleasure of good food, comfortable surroundings, engaging entertainment, physical intimacy. There's nothing wrong with pleasure in itself. The problem is that we believe pleasure will bring lasting happiness, and it never does. The first bite of chocolate is ecstasy. The 10th bite is just eating. The first minute of a massage is bliss. The 60th minute is just sensation. Pleasure fades by its very nature, and when it fades, we crave more. This is why the Buddha compared sensual craving to drinking salt water. It never quenches thirst. It only increases it. The second form of craving is craving for becoming. This is the desire to be something, to become someone. We want to be successful, admired, loved, important. We want to achieve our goals, fulfill our potential, leave our mark on the world. This craving drives us to improve ourselves, to work hard, to strive and achieve. But it also creates tremendous anxiety. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if someone else succeeds where I don't? The craving for becoming keeps us perpetually focused on the future, never satisfied with who and where we are right now. The third form is craving for non-becoming. This is the desire to get rid of things, to escape. We want to be free from pain, from boredom, from difficult emotions, from unpleasant situations. This craving shows up when we reach for our phones to avoid an awkward silence. When we drink to numb our feelings. When we distract ourselves with entertainment rather than sitting with our discomfort. It's the desire to have certain experiences go away. These three forms of craving work together to keep us off balance. We crave pleasure, so we chase it. We crave becoming, so we strive for it. We crave non-becoming, so we avoid and escape. And in all of this activity, we never simply rest in the present moment. We're always reaching for something else, always trying to get somewhere else, always wanting things to be different than they are. Let me share a story that illustrates how these cravings operate in ordinary life. A man named Raj ran a small business that he had built from nothing. He worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, for 20 years. His business grew. He became financially secure. By any external measure, he had succeeded. But Raj wasn't happy. He was exhausted, stressed, and secretly felt like a fraud who might be exposed at any moment. One day, his teenage daughter asked him a simple question. "Daddy, why do you work so much?" Raj opened his mouth to give his standard answer. "For you. For the family. To give you the life I never had." But the words wouldn't come. Because in that moment, he realized they weren't entirely true. He worked so much because of craving for becoming. He needed to prove himself. His father had told him he'd never amount to anything, and Raj had spent his entire adult life trying to disprove that. Every success was evidence, but it was never enough evidence. The craving for becoming kept him striving long after he had already become. He worked so much because of craving for sensual pleasures. Not just the pleasures that money could buy, though those were nice. But the pleasure of achievement itself. That momentary rush when he closed a big deal or received recognition. It was addictive, and like any addiction, it required bigger and bigger doses to achieve the same effect. And he worked so much because of craving for non-becoming. He was running from the uncomfortable feelings that arose when he wasn't working. The restlessness, the emptiness, the voice that whispered, "Is this all?" Work was his escape from having to sit with himself. The tragedy was that Raj's cravings were destroying the very things he thought he was working for. His health was suffering. His marriage was strained. His daughter was growing up with a father who was physically present but emotionally absent. The cravings that drove him were creating the suffering they promised to relieve. The Buddha's teaching on craving isn't a moral judgment. It's not saying you shouldn't want things. It's simply pointing out a fact. Craving causes suffering. You can verify this for yourself. Think of a time when you really wanted something and couldn't have it. Remember the tension, the frustration, the obsessive thoughts. That's craving. Think of a time when you had something you really wanted and then lost it. Remember the grief, the longing, the sense of something missing. That's also craving. Think of a time when you got exactly what you wanted. Remember how quickly the satisfaction faded and how soon you started wanting something else. That too is craving. The alternative to craving isn't apathy or indifference. It's a different quality of desire. The Buddha called this chanda, which means wholesome aspiration or wise intention. It's the desire for well-being, for peace, for freedom. It's the desire to understand, to grow, to love. Unlike craving, which is driven by a sense of lack and leads to more craving, wholesome aspiration is driven by a sense of fullness and leads to contentment. It's the difference between eating because you're hungry and eating because you appreciate the food. The first is driven by need. The second is driven by appreciation. When you begin to notice the difference between craving and wholesome aspiration, your relationship to desire transforms. You can still enjoy pleasures, but you don't grasp at them. You can still pursue goals, but you're not desperate about the outcome. You can still move away from pain, but you do so wisely rather than frantically. You begin to live from a place of enoughness rather than lack. And in that place, the suffering that craving creates naturally begins to dissolve. Understanding craving is essential, but understanding alone isn't enough. The Buddha was a practical teacher. He didn't just diagnose the problem. He prescribed a path. This path is what he called the Noble Eightfold Path, and it's not a list of beliefs to adopt or rules to follow. It's a set of 8 interconnected practices that support each other and lead gradually to freedom. The first practice is wise view or right understanding. This means seeing things as they really are, not as we wish them to be. It means understanding that actions have consequences, that change is inevitable, that clinging leads to suffering, and that peace is possible. Wise view isn't about adopting Buddhist philosophy. It's about seeing clearly for yourself. It's the understanding that emerges from your own investigation of experience. The second practice is wise intention or right thought. This is the quality of mind that directs our actions. It includes the intention of renunciation, which means letting go of clinging rather than grasping for more. It includes the intention of goodwill, which means wishing well for ourselves and others. And it includes the intention of harmlessness, which means committing to not causing suffering. These intentions shape everything else on the path. The third practice is wise speech or right speech. This is about communicating in ways that create harmony rather than conflict. The Buddha advised speaking truthfully, kindly, helpfully, and at the right time. He also advised abstaining from speech that's false, divisive, harsh, or idle. This isn't about being artificially nice. It's about recognizing that our words have power and using that power responsibly. The fourth practice is wise action or right action. This is about behaving in ways that honor life and relationships. The Buddha encouraged acting from kindness, honesty, and respect. He advised against killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. These aren't commandments from on high. They're practical guidelines for creating a life that doesn't cause harm to ourselves or others. The fifth practice is wise livelihood or right livelihood. This means earning a living in a way that doesn't cause suffering. Certain occupations, the Buddha pointed out, make it difficult to cultivate peace. Trading in weapons, living beings, intoxicants, or poisons, for example. But wise livelihood also has a positive dimension. It means bringing awareness and integrity to whatever work we do, seeing our work as an opportunity to contribute rather than just a way to make money. The sixth practice is wise effort or right effort. This is the energy we bring to the path. It's the effort to prevent unwholesome states from arising, to abandon unwholesome states that have arisen, to cultivate wholesome states that haven't yet arisen, and to maintain wholesome states that have arisen. Wise effort isn't about straining or forcing. It's about consistently directing our attention in ways that support well-being. The seventh practice is wise mindfulness or right mindfulness. This is the heart of meditation practice. It's the ability to be present with our experience, aware of what's happening without getting lost in it. The Buddha taught 4 foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of the mind, and mindfulness of mental phenomena. Each foundation offers a different lens for looking deeply into the nature of experience. The eighth practice is wise concentration or right concentration. This is the quality of collectedness, of mind unified and focused. It's developed through meditation practices that train the mind to settle on a single object, like the breath. When the mind is concentrated, it becomes a powerful tool for seeing clearly. It's like a still pool of water that perfectly reflects whatever is above it. These 8 practices aren't steps to be taken in order. They're more like threads in a tapestry, each supporting and strengthening the others. Wise view informs wise intention. Wise intention shapes wise speech and wise action. Wise livelihood creates conditions for wise effort. Wise effort supports wise mindfulness. Wise mindfulness deepens wise concentration. And wise concentration reveals wise view more clearly. Let me share a story that shows how these practices work together in everyday life. A young man named Tomas worked in a high-pressure sales environment. His job required him to persuade people to buy things they often didn't need. He was good at it, and he made good money. But over time, he began to feel a nagging discomfort. The discomfort was wise view beginning to dawn. He was seeing that his actions had consequences, and some of those consequences were suffering for others. This discomfort led to wise intention. Tomas began to consider whether he wanted to continue causing harm, even indirectly. He felt the intention of harmlessness arising naturally. This intention then shaped his actions. He started looking for another job. He found work with a non-profit organization. The pay was less, but the work felt aligned with his values. This new work was wise livelihood. It didn't require him to deceive people or encourage unnecessary consumption. The conditions of his new job also supported wise effort. He had more energy at the end of the day, more mental space for practice. He started meditating regularly, developing wise mindfulness and wise concentration. As his mindfulness deepened, his wise view became clearer. He saw more deeply how his old job had affected him, not just others. He saw the tension it had created in his body, the way it had kept his mind agitated. This clearer view reinforced his wise intention, and the whole cycle continued, each turn deepening his peace. The path isn't about perfection. Tomas still had challenges in his new job. He still felt craving and aversion. But the context had shifted. He was now moving in the direction of freedom rather than away from it. And that direction matters more than any particular destination. As we walk this path, we inevitably encounter obstacles. The Buddha didn't pretend the path would be easy. He identified 5 common hindrances that arise in meditation and in life, and he offered practical methods for working with each one. The first hindrance is sensual desire. This is the mind reaching for pleasant experiences. In meditation, it might show up as thinking about food, about a person you're attracted to, about an upcoming vacation. In life, it's the constant pull toward entertainment, consumption, and stimulation. Sensual desire isn't bad, but it's a hindrance when it distracts us from what's present. The antidote is to notice the desire without acting on it, to see it as just another mental event, and to direct attention back to the present moment. The second hindrance is ill will. This is the mind rejecting unpleasant experiences. In meditation, it might show up as aversion to boredom, to physical discomfort, to thoughts you don't want to have. In life, it's anger, resentment, judgment, and the desire to push away anything unpleasant. The antidote is to cultivate loving kindness, first toward ourselves and then toward others. When ill will is strong, we can practice sending wishes for well-being to the person or situation that's triggering us. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor. This is the mind sinking, becoming dull, heavy, sleepy. In meditation, it's nodding off or feeling foggy. In life, it's the lack of energy, the feeling of being stuck, the resistance to engaging fully. The antidote is to rouse energy. We can take a few deep breaths, open our eyes, stand up if we need to, or reflect on inspiration. Sometimes the best response to sloth is simply to notice it without judging it and then gently return to the present. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry. This is the mind racing, agitated, unable to settle. In meditation, it's the endless stream of thoughts about past and future. In life, it's anxiety, rumination, and the feeling of being overwhelmed. The antidote is to ground ourselves in the body, to focus on the breath, to cultivate calm. We can also reflect on impermanence, reminding ourselves that this agitation too will pass. The fifth hindrance is doubt. This is the mind questioning, I can't do this. This isn't working. What's the point? In meditation, it's skepticism about the practice. In life, it's lack of confidence, uncertainty about the path, and the tendency to give up when things get difficult. The antidote is to investigate the doubt itself, to see it as just another thought, and to remember the experiences we've already had that confirm the value of practice. Let me share a story about working with these hindrances. A woman named Lena had been meditating for several months. She sat every morning for 20 minutes, and she was starting to notice benefits. She felt calmer, more focused, less reactive. But one morning, she sat down to meditate and nothing happened. Well, things happened, but not the things she wanted. Her mind was wild. Thoughts raced through it like cars on a highway. She tried to focus on her breath, but the thoughts kept pulling her away. She tried to notice the thoughts without engaging them, but she kept getting caught. After 20 minutes, she opened her eyes feeling frustrated and discouraged. The next day was the same. And the next. By the end of the week, Lena was ready to give up. This meditation stuff worked for a while, she thought, but now it's not working. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. This is doubt, combined with a touch of restlessness and maybe some ill will toward the whole situation. Lena was experiencing the hindrances, and she was interpreting them as signs of failure rather than as normal parts of practice. Fortunately, she mentioned her frustration to a friend who had been meditating longer. Her friend listened and then said something that changed everything. "The hindrances aren't problems to be solved," her friend said. "They're the practice itself. When your mind is wild, that's your meditation. When doubt arises, that's your meditation. The question isn't how to get rid of them. The question is how to be with them." Lena sat with this. The next morning, when the thoughts started racing, she didn't try to push them away. She just noticed them. Racing thoughts. Lots of energy here. She didn't judge herself for having them. She just watched. And something shifted. The thoughts were still there, but they weren't a problem anymore. They were just the weather. And she was the sky. This is the secret to working with the hindrances. They only have power when we resist them or identify with them. When we can simply acknowledge them, they begin to lose their grip. Sensual desire arises. We notice it. It passes. Ill will arises. We notice it. It passes. Doubt arises. We notice it. It passes. They're just visitors passing through the mind. They only become residents when we invite them in for tea. In modern psychological terms, we might call this acceptance and commitment therapy. We accept what's arising in our experience without fighting it, and we commit to acting in ways that align with our values regardless of what's arising. The hindrances will come. They always do. But we don't have to be controlled by them. We can simply watch them come and go, like clouds moving across the sky, while we remain grounded in the awareness that holds it all. Now we arrive at one of the most misunderstood teachings of the Buddha. It's a teaching that, when properly understood, has the power to completely transform how we experience life. I'm speaking of impermanence. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent. Everything that arises will pass away. The body that seems so solid is constantly changing, cell by cell, breath by breath. The thoughts that seem so real appear and disappear in rapid succession. The relationships we count on, the possessions we treasure, the very planet we stand on, all of it is in a state of perpetual flux. For most of us, this is not good news. We want things to last. We want security, stability, permanence. We build our lives on the assumption that things will continue more or less as they are. And then life shows us otherwise. A loved one gets sick. A job disappears. A relationship ends. Our body starts to show its age. And we suffer, not just because of the change itself, but because we believe things wouldn't change. The Buddha wasn't being pessimistic when he pointed to impermanence. He was being profoundly realistic. And realism, even when it's uncomfortable, is the foundation of freedom. Because when we stop pretending things will last, we can start actually living. Let me share a story about a man who learned this lesson in a way he never expected. A man named Kenji was a gardener. He loved his work. He loved preparing the soil, planting the seeds, nurturing the young plants, watching them grow and bloom. His garden was his sanctuary, his pride, his joy. He spent every spare moment there, weeding, watering, pruning, tending. One summer, a terrible drought came to Kenji's region. Week after week passed without rain. The sun beat down mercilessly. Kenji watered his garden as much as he was allowed, but it wasn't enough. He watched his plants wither and die, one by one. The tomatoes he had nurtured from seedlings shriveled on the vine. The roses he had pruned with such care dropped their petals and turned brown. The lush green lawn became dry and crackly. Kenji was devastated. He stopped going into the garden. He couldn't bear to look at what he had lost. He spent his days inside, feeling angry and depressed. He raged against the weather, against the government for water restrictions, against fate itself. His wife watched this with concern. Finally, she said to him, "Kenji, the garden is dying without you. The plants that are left need you more than ever." Kenji shook his head. "What's the point? Everything I plant dies eventually. Why bother?" His wife took his hand. "Everything dies. That's true. But everything also lives. The garden isn't just about what's lost. It's about what's here now." Kenji thought about this. Slowly, reluctantly, he walked back to his garden. He saw the brown, the withered, the dead. But he also saw something else. A few plants had survived. Some were even blooming. The zinnias, tough and resilient, were covered in flowers. The marigolds were bright orange against the dry soil. And in the corner, a single tomato plant had produced one perfect, ripe tomato. Kenji knelt down and touched that tomato. It was warm from the sun. It was alive. It was perfect, right now, in this moment. And he understood something he had never understood before. The garden wasn't a possession to be kept forever. It was a conversation with life itself. A conversation that was always changing, always new. His job wasn't to make it last. His job was to show up for it, right now, and tend what was here. This is the wisdom of impermanence. It's not a reason to give up. It's a reason to show up fully. When you know that this moment will never come again, you stop taking it for granted. When you know that the people you love won't be here forever, you stop postponing your love. When you know that your own life is limited, you stop living on autopilot. The Buddha didn't teach impermanence to make us depressed. He taught it to wake us up. Look at a flower. It's beautiful precisely because it won't last. If it were permanent, it would become just another object. Its fragility is what makes it precious. Your life is like that flower. It's precious because it's fragile. It's meaningful because it's temporary. In modern psychology, this understanding is called mortality salience. Researchers have found that when people are reminded of their mortality, they typically react in one of two ways. Some become more anxious, more defensive, more attached to their cultural worldviews. Others become more appreciative of life, more compassionate, more present. The difference lies in how they relate to the truth of impermanence. The path the Buddha offered is a training in the second response. Through mindfulness, we learn to touch impermanence directly, not as a concept, but as a living reality. We feel the breath coming and going. We notice thoughts appearing and disappearing. We sense the constant flux in our own body. And gradually, we make peace with change. Not because we've become indifferent, but because we've learned to love what's here while it's here, without needing it to stay. When we truly understand impermanence, something remarkable happens. We begin to experience the world with fresh eyes. The Buddha called this seeing things as they really are. And when we see things as they really are, we discover a quality of freedom that doesn't depend on conditions. This freedom is often described in Buddhist teachings as nirvana, a word that means extinguishing or cooling. It's the extinguishing of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion that keep us trapped in suffering. It's not a place you go to after death. It's a way of being that's available here and now, whenever the mind lets go of its clinging. Let me share a story about a woman who touched this freedom in the midst of ordinary life. A woman named Priya was a hospice nurse. She spent her days with people who were dying. She helped them manage pain, she listened to their stories, she held their hands as they took their last breaths. Most people found this work depressing. They'd ask Priya, "How can you do that work? Isn't it so sad?" Priya would smile and say, "It's the opposite of sad. It's the most alive I've ever felt." Because Priya had learned something from all those who were dying. She had learned that the imminence of death strips away everything that isn't essential. She watched people let go of grudges they'd held for decades. She saw them forgive themselves and others. She witnessed them drop the pretense, the performance, the constant effort to be someone. In their final days, they became more themselves than they had ever been. One patient in particular stayed with Priya. An elderly man named Joseph, who had been a successful businessman. For most of his life, Joseph had measured everything by results. Deals closed, money earned, status achieved. But now, lying in his bed, unable to do anything, he was forced to simply be. One day, Joseph said to Priya, "You know, I spent my whole life running. Running to the next meeting, the next deal, the next achievement. I thought I was getting somewhere. But now I see. I was just running in circles. All that mattered, all that ever mattered, was right here. This moment. This breath. Your hand in mine." He paused, then added, "I wish I had learned to sit still sooner. I missed so much." Priya held his hand and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The truth was right there in the room with them. This is the freedom the Buddha pointed to. It's not about achieving something. It's about stopping the running. It's about realizing that what you've been seeking has been here all along, hidden beneath the constant activity of the mind. In our culture, we're addicted to becoming. We're always in the process of becoming something else. Becoming more successful, more attractive, more enlightened. We're never satisfied with what we are right now. The spiritual path is often co-opted by this same addiction. We turn it into another project, another thing to achieve. I'm going to become enlightened. I'm going to become peaceful. I'm going to become a good meditator. But the Buddha's teaching points in a different direction. It points to the possibility of stopping the becoming altogether. Of resting in the simple fact of being, without needing to become anything else. This is what Joseph discovered in his final days. This is what Priya witnessed again and again. When you stop running, you arrive. And where you arrive is right here, right now, exactly as you are. This doesn't mean we stop growing or improving. It means we do so from a different place. We act from fullness rather than lack. We learn from a place of already being complete. We love from a place of already being whole. The becoming is just activity, not an attempt to fix a fundamental deficiency. Let me offer you a simple practice to touch this freedom. Right now, as you listen to my voice, notice the sensation of your breath. Just one breath. Don't try to make it deeper or slower or more peaceful. Just notice it exactly as it is. In this breath, there's nothing to achieve. No goal to reach. No problem to solve. Just this simple experience of being alive. Rest here for a moment. Feel the completeness of this single breath. This is the freedom that's always available. It's not somewhere else. It's not something to earn. It's the background of every moment, hidden in plain sight by the constant activity of the mind. When you learn to rest here, even for a moment, you touch a peace that truly passes understanding. A peace that doesn't depend on things being a certain way. A peace that's simply your own true nature, uncovered. Thank you. Let's continue. As we cultivate these qualities of heart, we begin to notice something interesting. The boundary between self and other starts to soften. The same awareness that knows your own experience is the awareness that knows the experience of others. It's not your awareness and my awareness. It's just awareness, appearing differently through different lenses. This isn't a philosophical position to adopt. It's an experience to be had. And when it's had, compassion becomes not just a practice but a way of being. You don't have to work at caring about others. You recognize that their well-being is inseparable from your own. Let me share a final story that points to this understanding. A woman named Sophia was walking through a market in a foreign country where she was traveling. She didn't speak the language, and she felt lost and a little anxious. The market was crowded and chaotic, full of sights and sounds she couldn't interpret. As she walked, she noticed a small child sitting on the ground near a stall. The child was crying, looking around desperately. Sophia's first thought was to keep walking. Not my business. I don't know what's happening here. I can't even communicate. But something stopped her. She looked at the child's face, and she saw something she recognized. Fear. Loneliness. The feeling of being lost. She had felt that way just moments ago, navigating this unfamiliar place. The feeling was the same, even though the circumstances were different. Sophia walked over and sat down on the ground next to the child. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, present. The child looked at her, still crying, but now with curiosity mixed in. Sophia smiled gently. She pointed to herself and said her name. Then she pointed to the child and raised her eyebrows in a question. The child, sniffling, pointed to herself and said a name. Sophia repeated the name and nodded. They sat together for a few more minutes. Then a woman came rushing over, frantic, and scooped up the child. She looked at Sophia with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. Sophia just smiled and nodded. As she walked away, Sophia realized something. In that moment of sitting with the child, she hadn't been a foreigner and the child hadn't been a local. They had just been two beings, sharing a moment of connection. The boundaries that seemed so real, the language barrier, the cultural differences, the stranger danger, had all dissolved in the simple act of being present with another's suffering. This is the promise of the path the Buddha laid out. It's not about becoming a better person. It's about realizing who you already are. The peace you seek, the compassion you admire in others, the freedom you dream of, it's all already here, hidden beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and grasping. The path is simply the process of uncovering it. Every story we've shared tonight is a finger pointing at this truth. The young woman drowning in her thoughts, learning to watch the waves. The potter discovering that his pot was just a temporary arrangement. The businessman running from himself, exhausting himself in the pursuit of more. The gardener devastated by loss, learning to love what's here. The hospice nurse witnessing the freedom that comes when running stops. The man on the train platform, seeing through judgment to the suffering beneath. The traveler in the market, finding connection across every divide. These are not just stories from long ago or far away. They're maps of your own heart. They're descriptions of experiences you can have, insights you can realize, freedom you can taste. The path is open. The way is clear. It's been taught for 2,500 years, not as a doctrine to believe, but as a practice to do. And the practice, in its essence, is simple. Pause. Breathe. Notice what's here. Let go of grasping. Open to what is. Again and again and again. Not to get somewhere else, but to be fully here, where you've always been. As we come to the end of our time together at Monk's Temple, take a moment to receive these teachings in your own way. You don't have to remember every story, every concept, every teaching. Just let the essence sink in. Let it settle in the quiet spaces of your heart. And when you're ready, take one last breath together with me. Breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. In this breath, there's nowhere to go, nothing to do, no one to be. Just this. Just this. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be free. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your practice. May the seeds planted tonight grow and bloom in your life, bringing peace to you and to all those you touch. Until we meet again.